If you love classic heritage denim, you've probably heard of the Levi's 501 Shrink-to-Fit jeans. But how do these measure up against the Wrangler classic, the Cowboy Cut 13MWZ? Today I'm going to be comparing them both after wearing them in real life. The fit, the fabric, the shrinkage, the styling, all of it. And I'm going to share that with you. If you're new here, my name's Rebecca, and I love making videos about sewing, knitting, creating a handmade wardrobe, but also about slow fashion. And I think when it comes to criticizing and comparing jeans and denim, I have a unique perspective because I have made many pairs of jeans. When it comes to ready-to-wear denim, one of my favorites are the Levi 501 Shrink-to-Fits, and I've made a couple videos about those before that sparked a lot of really great conversation. So today we're going head to head with the Levi 501 Shrink-to-Fit and the Wrangler Cowboy Cut 13MWZ. Also, just to clarify, I'm a woman wearing men's jeans in both of these situations, and that is intentional, in part because it's really hard to find quality 100% cotton, particularly shrink-to-fit denim in women's clothing. It's not really on the market. Levi does not make a shrink-to-fit for women. I find in general, the jeans that are marketed to women are often made of thinner fabric, so the weight of the denim is not as heavy. They often have a small percentage of spandex to provide stretch, and the shaping is much more fitted, typically closer to the body. And that's just not what I'm going for. I love a rigid 100% cotton denim. I love vintage kind of classic styling, and I want a more mid-rise relaxed fit. If you're a woman looking to try these more classic kind of like vintage heritage style of jeans, I do think that both the 501 Shrink-to-Fit as well as the Wrangler Cowboy Cut are a great place to start. You're going to get a higher weight of fabric, typically a little bit better quality of fabric than the ones marketed to women by the same brands often. And it's totally achievable to get the fit that you like. You might just have to adjust your sizing a little bit. For example, my natural waist is typically like a 27 or a 28 inch. And for both of these pairs of jeans that I'm going to be trying out and comparing today, I've gotten a 30-inch waist. And that's because they're not going to sit at my natural waist on my body. Actually, they both are probably going to be more around high hip, below the belly button level, more of a mid-rise. Keep that in mind if you're thinking about ordering online, for example. Go up a couple of inches because they're going to sit lower on your body. So let's just do a quick overview of both of these jeans. I'm not going to go into a lot of depth on the Levi's 501 Shrink-to-Fits because, as I said, I have made 2 videos about those before. So if you want to have a lot more information about the shrink-to-fit process, definitely check out those videos below. But some basic information. They are a shrink-to-fit jean, which means they have not been pre-shrunk or Sanfordized, which is basically just the process of pre-shrinking the fabric. They're 100% cotton. They are a button fly. They're a mid-rise and a straight leg with a slight taper. And they have kind of this classic Americana fit and style to them. These have been around for a very long time, longer than the Wrangler Cowboy Cut, which is important to note for later. And a lot of people still love them because of that classic association. Some basics about the Wrangler 13MWZ. These are Sanfordized, which means they have been pre-shrunk and will have less shrinkage when washing, possibly still some, we're going to find out. But the intention with Sanfordized fabrics is that they're not going to shrink significantly with wash. The Wranglers are also 100% cotton, but I should note that they are heavier. So if I didn't mention, the Levi's are typically around a 12-ounce denim, and the Wrangler Cowboy Cut jeans are much heavier at like a 14.75 ounce, and that's the weight per yard of the fabric. So you're going to get a heavier denim. The Wranglers have a zip fly, which is not my preference. I do prefer a button fly, but I think that they are constructed well, and we'll get into that as well. The Wranglers are also advertised as a high-rise jean, which I think is really interesting because they're going for this kind of cowboy lifestyle, and often the rodeo participants would want to tuck their shirts into their jeans, and so the Cowboy Cut jeans say that they are high rise. However, if you look at the measurement, it's about 11 1/8 of an inch rise, and the Levi Shrink-to-Fits is like 12 1/4 inch. Granted, there will be some shrinkage there, but that's something to keep in mind. I think both of these are more of a mid-rise. So the Wrangler jeans have the intention of being worn, at least stylistically, by someone riding a horse. They have much more of a Western aesthetic. The stitching on the back, as well as the rivets and the slightly more tapered leg than the Levi's, definitely give it more of a Western styling, as opposed to the kind of classic retro Americana of the Levi 501 Shrink-to-Fits. These jeans both have roots. Their origins are in workwear. However, they are very different in how they wear, how they fit, how they break in and fade, and in their style. Also, because the Levi's are not Sanfordized, right? They're going to shrink. They're also going to fade very differently. So the 501s are going to have a more dramatic fading over time and whiskering in places where the body moves. Whereas the Wranglers, while they will still fade and whisker a bit over time, the color fade is going to be much more universal, and you'll see less of that dramatic contrast in whiskering as they fade. So I mentioned before that the Levi's came first, which I think is important when you consider the fact that when Wranglers were developed, they had Levi's to compare to as a base, right, for a workwear jean. So I do think they've made some changes that are improvements on the Levi 501s. So one being the fabric. The fabric is heavier, which means it's more durable, which means it's going to be a harder working jean. It's not going to rip as easily, etc. Also, the weave of the fabric is different. Something that a lot of people who are interested in raw denim or Levi's vintage stuff know about is that the weave of the fabric it's a diagonal twill, and this can often cause the outside leg seam to kind of twist with washing and drying. And a lot of people really like that. It's kind of a unique feature and a visual identifier of that specific Levi's twill. Wrangler has a broken twill, so it creates more of like a zigzag than a specific diagonal. And that's going to prevent the denim from twisting, but it also makes it a bit stronger. So because they had the Levi's to go off of, they were able to make improvements like this to make a stronger pair of pants to work in, right? These were designed to be worn during heavy physical labor, and they were able to make improvements. Also, the inclusion of those metal rivets is going to make them much sturdier. They have more belt loops. Also, the Wranglers have fully felled side seams. So I can show you the inside of the 501s. The seam finish, it's been serged, so it's not going to fray, but the Wrangler, being a fully felled seam, is much more durable long term.
So here you can see the Wranglers are on the left and the Levi's on the right. What's interesting to me is that the Wrangler has a felled seam on the outside, but the inside of the leg is just a serged seam, so they've prioritized the outside seams. I think the stitch quality might be a little bit better on the Levi's, the consistency of the stitch. And you can also see here that the Wranglers have a zip fly. Their coin pocket construction is a little bit different than the Levi's. It doesn't have rivets. However, the back patch pockets do have rivets, and you can see that extra belt loop as well as a very large leather patch, which is kind of a nice detail. The Levi's use a paper patch, and this one is leather. Here you can see the zip fly, which is constructed well, and I would say that the buttons on the Levi's are lower quality than the button on the Wrangler, just as far as like the weight of the button. However, the Wrangler jeans have a serged finish on the pocket bags, and the Levi's do a French seam, completely contains the seam edge, and I think is nicer. They both do have a felled finish for the back yoke, which is really nice. And I'm starting to realize that a lot of the differences here are going to be like stylistic choices, such as the contrast top stitching on the fly, whereas the Wrangler, they don't do the contrast top stitching on the fly, but they do in other places, such as around the pocket and on the back pockets. So I think you're just going to have to decide, do you want a heavier weight denim? Here again, that coin pocket is sewn into the side seam as opposed to the Levi's where it's a patch pocket. I don't think either one is going anywhere, but it is interesting to notice these differences in construction. And here you can see a little bit closer, the button on the Wrangler is quite a bit thicker and it feels like a heavier button. The ones on the Levi's honestly feel like those cheap little replacement buttons you can order off of Amazon. They're very thin. And here I just wanted to show you a comparison of the depth of the back yoke and the placement of the pocket. The Levi's pockets are lower, much lower than the Wrangler, which I think a lot of people prefer the way that the Wrangler jeans look on the butt. And so I think a lot of that has to do with the pocket placement. Okay, so here I just wanted to show you the Wranglers on before washing them. So I've still got the tags on here. This is the first initial try on, and I will wash them and show you how they look after washing as well. But I think the initial fit is really good. As I said before, both the Wranglers and the Levi's, I have a waist 30, and I'll show you with the Levi's. I started initially with a 30 length as well, but for subsequent pairs I would get a 32. So this pair of Wranglers is a 30 by 32, and I think the sizing is spot on. They're very comfortable. There's a lot of creasing at the front, I think, honestly, just from being in the package, and I can show you after washing a bit of that relax. This might be a good time to mention as well the initial cost of both pairs. I probably should have mentioned that earlier in the video, but these Wrangler 13MWZ jeans retail at around $60, and the Levi 501 Shrink-to-Fits around $80. I will say that you can typically find like a sale or a discount code for either one. I think that I paid around $50 for the Levi's, and I think I got these at a discount of like 45-ish. So the initial price, the Wranglers are about $20 cheaper. I think that the heavier weight fabric works really well. It doesn't feel stiff, it still feels soft, but I do like the heavier weight, and I think the drape and hang of these is really nice. They feel substantial, but they also feel very comfortable. Okay, and here are the Wranglers after washing. So I decided to follow the instructions that come with the jeans, and it says to put them inside out and to machine wash them on cold. And then you can either throw them in the dryer on a low heat or hang them to dry. And it's been super hot here recently, so I just hung them to dry outside and they were dry in a couple of hours. I do think that washing has tightened them up just a little bit, but not in a bad way. There was a little bit of gaping at the back waist, and that seems to have been resolved by washing. I also think some of those creases have relaxed that were probably just from how it was packaged. And I do really love the fit of these. I think the length is perfect. I do enjoy that the pockets are a little bit higher. I can show you here in a second, but I think the pockets on the Levi's are a little bit low. Overall, I'm very impressed with the Wrangler 13MWZ jeans. I think initially, because of the product photos on their website, I imagined that the leg would be more tapered. They're showing them on male bodies that have quite muscular legs, and it looks like they're tighter around the ankle. So I'm very pleased that they are much more of a straight leg. I really, really like the shape and how it just kind of falls straight down from the hip. I think it's a great fit for men and women. So here we have the Levi 501 Shrink-to-Fit. As I mentioned, this is a waist 30 and the length is also 30. I decided to cuff this pair as they were a little more cropped. You can see the pockets on the back are much lower down from the yoke than on the Wranglers, which does give a little bit more of a saggy bum look, but I don't mind it. I really like the color of this denim. I will say that I got kind of the classic indigo shade for both pairs, and you can see that the Wranglers are much more of like a French blue and less of a deep navy indigo. They do have a darker wash available on the Wrangler site, but I wanted to go for just like the base indigo with each to compare. I really like the leg shape of the 501s. I think that these sit a little bit lower on my body, but that's probably because I've been wearing them a lot and they've relaxed. I imagine that as I wear the Wranglers a bit more, they also will kind of go down on my hip a little bit as the waistband relaxes, which is totally fine. And you can see the patch on the back of the Levi's is much higher up on the waistband and not on the back pocket as well. These are super comfortable. You can tell that the fabric is thinner than the Wranglers. So I also wanted to show you the second pair of shrink-to-fits that I purchased because I got a 30 waist again, but I went to a 32 in length. I think the longer length just suits me better, and I don't like when pants are kind of at an awkward crop where it's not intentionally cropped. So definitely think the 32 suits me better. I also wanted to mention on the 501s that the waistband sort of hitches in kind of like a very subtle V at the front, which is just for comfort. The Wrangler is more straight across, and you can see here at the button, it kind of dips down a little bit. So I thought that was also worth noting as a little bit of a fit difference.
So as far as styling goes, I think that the Levi 501 shrink-to-fits, or just the 501s in general, have a much more classic kind of Americana feel. And I think that they're very versatile. They can be dressed up or down quite easily because there isn't all of the hardware that's added to the Wranglers, for example. Like the rivets are much more prominent and the top stitching is much more prominent. And so I think it's a little bit harder to dress up the Wranglers. They have a similar workwear feel, but I think they go more casual. I do think it's easier to dress up the 501s. That being said, I think that the way that the Wranglers feel is, I think the fabric feels more substantial because it is a heavier weight denim. I think it's also a bit softer, and because you have that color consistency over time, they're going to fade more evenly and give you that like washed vintage denim look, which a lot of people, including myself, really like. I'm excited to have both in my wardrobe so that I can play with both, but something to consider if you're comparing them is the Levi's are going to be a lighter weight denim that could go a little more formal if you desired, and the Wranglers are a heavier weight denim that I think is going to look a bit more casual and lean into the workwear more than maybe streetwear, if that makes sense. I also think because of the thicker fabric of the Wranglers, they're going to look more structured. When you think about workwear, you think often of heavier fabrics like heavyweight denim, canvas, things like that. And I do think the Wranglers are going to maintain a structured look for longer, whereas because the Levi's are made of a lighter weight fabric and the cut is a bit more relaxed, I think that they are going to look less structured more quickly. So also something to think about as far as your aesthetic and what look you prefer. Let me know in the comments, are you team Levi's or are you team Wrangler? Maybe you love both and wear both. I would love to know your experience. And if you want to see how my 501s have aged over a year plus of wear, I will be sure to link those videos below. I will also be sure to follow up with the Wrangler jeans after I've had a chance to really break them in. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoy this sort of content, please do consider hitting subscribe, and I look forward to chatting with you in the next one very soon. Bye.